The Queen of the Star Empire sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the endless view of the galaxies beyond her palace window. From the outside, she looked strong, dressed in armor lined with silver light, her crown reflecting the glow of 3 suns. But inside, she felt her strength slipping away, like sand falling through open hands. For months, her body had been fighting against an illness that no medicine could name. Healers from across the stars had tried everything. Machines scanned her blood, crystals were burned in sacred fire, and even forbidden science was whispered in secret halls. Nothing worked. The Queen was dying, and all who served her knew it, though none dared to say it aloud. Her council gathered in the chamber below, their voices sharp and restless. Some spoke of finding new medicines, others argued for experiments that risked lives. But then an old advisor, whose face was lined with age and wisdom, stepped forward and reminded them of the prophecy. His voice was calm, but it carried across the room. Long ago, before the Empire even had ships, their ancestors had carved words into stone. When the crown is darkened and the light begins to fade, only one not born of the stars may heal the Queen. The counselors scoffed. To them, it was nothing but a myth told by dreamers, a story for children. How could an outsider, a being from some forgotten corner of the galaxy, do what their brightest minds could not? The Queen, however, did not laugh. In her heart, the words of the prophecy echoed. She had seen it too often in her dreams, a shadowy figure, small and fragile, yet holding a fire no alien had ever carried. Every time she woke, her pulse raced with the memory. She began to wonder if the sickness was not just a curse, but a signal that the prophecy was true. And if it was true, then the answer to her survival did not lie in machines or medicine. It lay in someone from beyond the Empire's stars. Quietly, she ordered her scouts to search. They traveled through hidden gates, past the edges of known space, and listened in secret to the stories of distant worlds. Many reports returned empty, but one message stood out. There was a small planet, blue and green, filled with creatures that looked weak but had survived countless trials. They called themselves humans. These humans had no great fleets, no ancient powers, yet they had pushed back against dangers larger than themselves. They were stubborn, clever, and often reckless. Something about them felt different from all others. The Queen's breath grew shallow as she heard the report, as if her body already knew the truth her mind refused to accept. The council protested fiercely when she announced her decision. How could their queen, ruler of countless worlds, depend on a creature so simple, so unworthy? To them it was shameful. To her it was hope. With her voice steady, she silenced their arguments. She told them that the Empire was built not on pride but on survival. If a human truly was the answer, then no pride was too high a price. She declared that a human must be brought to her palace, alive and untouched, no matter the cost. The search grew more focused. Hidden ships crossed the cold void, reaching the planet Earth. From orbit, the alien scouts watched humanity in secret. They saw cities glowing with light, rivers of steel carrying moving machines, and small groups of humans laughing under the stars. What amazed them was not power but resilience. These humans were fragile compared to the great warriors of the Empire, but they kept rising after every fall. In their eyes there was something unbroken. The scout sent word back to the Queen. Her heart, though weak, beat faster. She whispered to herself that the time of waiting was over. The prophecy was not a story. It was a path. But deep within the Empire, not everyone wanted the Queen saved. Shadows moved through the halls of the palace, whispering of power. Rivals watched her illness with hungry eyes. If she died, they would rise. For them, the prophecy was dangerous. If it proved true, it would give her more power than ever before. And so they plotted to stop the search, to silence any talk of humans, and to ensure that the Queen's illness ended not in salvation, but in her death. The Queen knew the danger. She could feel the coldness in the words of certain lords, the way they bowed too quickly, the way their eyes shone with hidden fire. Yet she pressed on. Even if the prophecy was a lie, even if this human was powerless, she had nothing left to lose. Her life was already slipping away. Only the chance, however small, could save her. She looked once more out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the oceans of darkness, was the one who might carry the light she needed. Somewhere out there was a human. The human never expected his life to change on that ordinary evening. He walked home through quiet streets, carrying nothing more than a bag of groceries, unaware that eyes from another world were already watching him. High above the earth, hidden behind clouds and satellites, an alien ship waited in silence. Inside, the Queen's scout studied him carefully. Many humans had been observed before, but this one had drawn their attention for reasons they could not fully explain. His life was simple, yet he carried himself with a steady calm, and when trouble came his way, he faced it with quiet courage rather than fear. To the scouts, he seemed ordinary. To the prophecy, he might be everything. The first contact was subtle. Lights flickered as he walked, and strange whispers filled the night air. He thought it was only his imagination, the kind that came when he was tired. But then the ground shook, and the sky opened in a flash of brilliance. Before he could run, the light wrapped around him, pulling him upward with unstoppable force. His groceries fell, scattering across the pavement, but he did not have time to think. The next moment, the earth was far below, and cold metal walls surrounded him. Fear gripped him. He shouted, demanded answers, tried to fight the invisible hands that carried him deeper into the ship. Yet the aliens did not harm him. Their tall figures moved with careful steps, their glowing eyes watching with a mix of curiosity and caution. He was placed in a chamber filled with strange air that hummed against his skin. He gasped, but he could breathe. It was not a prison, though it felt like one. One of the scouts approached, speaking in a voice that echoed inside his mind, rather than through sound. The words were slow at first, broken, but soon they became clear. They told him he was chosen. They told him their queen was dying and that only a human could save her. He laughed at the absurdity of it. How could he, a single man with no special skills, do anything for a ruler of the stars? But as the scout's eyes glowed brighter, the laughter faded. Something deep inside him whispered that this was not a dream. It was real, and it was far greater than him. The journey across the stars began. He stood by the window of the ship, staring at the endless black sprinkled with fire. Earth grew smaller until it was only a dot, a fragile world lost in the sea of space. His fear remained, but curiosity grew stronger. What kind of queen needed him? What kind of illness could not be healed by beings who commanded ships that crossed light years in moments? Questions filled his mind, and though the scouts spoke little, they promised answers would come when he met her. Meanwhile, in the palace of the Empire, the queen waited. Her body weakened with each passing day. She tried to hide it, but even the strongest will could not fight the trembling of her hands or the sharp pain that burned in her chest. When she learned the human had been found, her heart stirred. For the first time in months, she felt something that was neither despair nor exhaustion. She felt hope, but it was fragile, like a flame in a storm. The human's arrival was not celebrated. Many within the court looked upon him with disdain. To them he was small, soft, and unworthy of stepping foot inside their sacred halls. Some called him a pet, others a mistake. Whispers filled the palace, spreading doubt and anger. The queen's rivals smiled quietly, pleased that she had lowered herself to rely on such a creature. They planned to use this against her, to turn her people against the prophecy. Yet the queen did not care. She ordered that the human be brought to her throne. When he entered, his legs shook not from weakness but from awe. The chamber was vast, lined with crystal pillars that glowed like captured starlight. At its center stood the queen, taller than he imagined, her presence commanding though her face showed traces of pain. She looked at him not as one looks at a soldier or servant, but as someone who might hold the answer to her survival. He met her eyes, expecting only coldness, but instead, he saw something else, something human. It was loneliness. In that brief moment, he understood that behind the crown and armor, she was not so different from him. The first test was simple. She reached out her hand and asked him to step closer. He hesitated, every instinct screaming to run, but something stronger guided him forward. As their hands touched, a spark ran through both of them. Her body trembled, and his heart raced. The air itself seemed to hum with unseen power. The advisors gasped, unable to believe their eyes. For the first time, the queen felt the curse inside her shift, reacting to the presence of the human. It was real. The prophecy had spoken true. But the moment passed quickly. The power faded, and weakness returned. The queen let go, her expression unreadable, though her eyes burned with new fire. The human stepped back, shaken but alive. He did not understand what had just happened, but he knew one thing with certainty. His life was no longer his own. He had been drawn into something larger than he could imagine, and though fear gripped him, a quiet strength began to rise within. The queen ordered that the human be taken to a private chamber within the palace. It was not a prison, but it did not feel like freedom either. Guards stood at every door, their tall forms and glowing weapons making it clear that escape was impossible. The human sat on a strange bed made of soft crystal, trying to steady his breath. His mind raced with questions. Why him? What was expected? And what had truly happened when his hand touched the queen's? The queen herself was restless. In the quiet of her throne room, she paced with slow steps, her body aching but her spirit alive in a way it had not been in months. The spark she had felt was not imagined. When the human touched her, the curse had stirred as if frightened, and for a moment, its hold had weakened. She had felt a warmth that her healers and machines had never brought her. The prophecy was not just words carved in stone, it was unfolding before her eyes. Yet one part of it troubled her deeply. The old texts spoke not only of touch, but of bonding, of a union between two lives. If that was true, then this human was not just her healer. He was her destined mate. She struggled to accept it. How could her empire understand if their queen, a ruler of stars, joined herself to a fragile being from Earth? Already her council whispered against her, calling the prophecy foolish. To bind herself to him would bring shame in their eyes, maybe even rebellion. But without him she would die, and her empire would fall into chaos. Later that night, she entered his chamber without warning. The guard stepped aside, bowing deeply as she approached. The human rose quickly, startled by her sudden presence. For a long moment neither spoke. She studied him, her sharp eyes searching his face as if trying to read his soul. He looked back at her, nervous but unwilling to bow. Something in his stubbornness caught her attention. He did not act like a subject kneeling before a queen. He acted like himself, plain and unshaken by her crown. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of command. She told him about the prophecy in simple words, about the curse that drained her life, and about the ancient belief that only one not born of the stars could save her. She explained that the spark they had felt was proof. But then her voice lowered, softer, almost hesitant. The cure was not a simple touch. It required bonding, a deep and unbreakable connection between them. If he accepted, their lives would be tied together. If he refused, she would die. The human listened in silence. The idea was overwhelming. He was no hero, no chosen warrior. He had lived a life of ordinary days, never imagining he would stand before an alien queen who spoke of destiny and life or death. He wanted to refuse, to shout that they had the wrong person. Yet when he looked into her eyes, he saw not only her power but her fear. She was strong, yet she was alone, carrying a burden too heavy for one soul. Against his will, his heart stirred with something like compassion. He asked her why it had to be him out of all the humans on Earth. She admitted she did not know. The prophecy never gave a name. Perhaps it was fate or perhaps it was chance. But the truth was clear. When he touched her, the curse trembled, and that could not be ignored. She decided to test him. If he was to be her mate, even by prophecy, he needed to prove his worth. She led him to a hidden hall of the palace, where the air shimmered with strange energy. In the center was a crystal, unlike any other, pulsing with soft light. She told him to place his hand on it. The crystal was a relic from her ancestors, a stone that revealed the true nature of one's spirit. Warriors who touched it saw visions of their battles. Leaders saw crowns or fire. She wished to see what kind of soul lived inside the human. He stepped forward slowly, placing his hand on the glowing surface. At first, nothing happened. Then the light burst upward, filling the hall with dazzling waves. The human gasped as visions swirled before his eyes. He saw himself walking through fire, yet unburned. He saw himself standing beside the queen, holding her hand while storms of darkness broke around them. And then he saw Earth, small and fragile, shining like a jewel in the void. The queen watched in silence, her heart racing. The crystal had never shown such images before. She saw the same visions, shared through the bond that was already beginning to form. She realized then that this human was more than chance. He was the answer she had been waiting for. When the vision ended, he stumbled back, breathless. The queen caught his arm, steadying him. For the first time, her touch was gentle rather than formal. She looked at him with new eyes, no longer as a tool of prophecy, but as someone who carried courage in ways her people could not understand. She told him that the bonding trial would begin soon, and that from this moment onward he was no longer a stranger. He was part of her fate. The human stood silently, trying to process everything. He did not fully understand what bonding meant, nor what trials lay ahead. But one thing was clear in his heart. He could not walk away, not now. Something greater than himself had chosen him, and though he was afraid, he would face it. The queen's curse was now his burden too. The palace, though grand and shining with towers of crystal, was not a place of peace. Whispers filled the halls like hidden storms. Many within the court were unhappy that their queen had brought a human into their sacred world. To them, he was nothing but a fragile outsider who did not belong among stars. Some feared the prophecy, others despised it, but all who opposed the queen saw an opportunity. If the human was removed, the prophecy would die with him, and the queen's sickness would finish its work. Power would pass to new hands. The queen knew this truth, though she spoke little of it. She had ruled too long not to recognize the coldness in her counselors' bows or the sharpness in their polite words. Some had already begun to move against her. The illness that weakened her body also weakened her throne, and now they whispered of replacing her. She stood strong before them, but in her private chambers, the weight of betrayal pressed heavily on her heart. The human, though unaware of all the schemes, could feel the tension. Guards who once looked at him with curiosity now stared with hostility. Servants avoided his presence, whispering when he passed. He felt like a prisoner more than a guest, and the walls of the palace seemed to grow taller each day. Still, he could not shake the memory of the crystal's vision, nor the spark that had leapt between him and the queen. Something tied him here, even if the whole empire wanted him gone. One night, as the palace slept beneath the glow of twin moons, an attempt was made on his life. Shadows slipped through the corridor outside his chamber, their blades gleaming faintly. The human awoke with a start, hearing the soft hiss of the door sliding open. He froze, heart racing as dark figures entered. Before they could strike, a sudden flash of light cut across the room. The queen herself appeared, her staff glowing with fierce energy. With a single gesture, she cast the assassins back, their weapons scattering. Guards rushed in moments later, but it was clear, without her, the human would not have survived. She stood before him, her chest heaving with pain, the effort of the fight weighing on her weakened body. Yet her eyes were fierce. She told him plainly that this would not be the last attempt. The court would not allow the prophecy to unfold without resistance. He was in danger as long as he remained unprepared. The next morning, she commanded that he be trained, not as a soldier of the empire, for his body could not match theirs, but in the ways of defense, awareness, and cleverness. She assigned one of her trusted captains to teach him. At first, the human struggled. The weapons were too heavy, the movements too strange, and the stares of the soldiers too sharp. They laughed at him behind their helmets, calling him weak, calling him useless. But he did not give up. Day after day, he returned to the training hall, bruised and tired, but more determined than before. His stubbornness began to silence the mockery. The queen watched from afar, hiding her pride behind her cold mask. Every stumble he recovered from, every failure he turned into progress reminded her why the prophecy had chosen him. He was not the strongest, not the fastest, but he was relentless. Where her people valued perfection, he carried resilience. That resilience was exactly what her empire had lost. But even as he grew stronger, the shadows grew bolder. Rumors spread through the palace that the queen had cursed herself by bringing him. Some whispered that the human was not a savior, but a weapon meant to destroy them. Others claimed the visions of the crystal had been false, illusions created by the queen to cling to her throne. The council grew restless, pressing her to abandon the path of prophecy. One evening, the queen gathered her advisors to silence their doubts. She declared that the prophecy was true, that the human was the key and that anyone who dared to move against him would answer to her directly. Her voice shook with the force of her will, but as she spoke, her body betrayed her. A wave of weakness struck her mid-sentence and she faltered. Gasps filled the hall. Rivals smiled behind polite masks. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. The council had seen her failing strength. Later, in the quiet of her chamber, the human found her seated in the shadows, her crown resting beside her. For the first time, she did not wear the mask of command. She looked tired, fragile, and human in ways he never expected. He sat beside her, unsure what to say. At last, he told her that even if the whole empire stood against them, he would not walk away. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that touched her more deeply than she let him see. The bond between them was growing, even without the final ritual. Every attempt to break them only pushed them closer together. And though enemies still plotted in silence, the Queen knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer alone in this fight. The prophecy had brought her a mate, not yet in body but in spirit. Together they would face whatever storms waited ahead. The day of the first ritual came sooner than the human expected. For nights he had dreamed of fire and shadow, of the Queen's voice calling his name in languages he did not understand. When he awoke, sweat clung to his skin, and he felt as though part of her suffering was already inside him. He tried to tell himself it was only fear, only the weight of being trapped in a palace where half the people wanted him dead. But when he looked into the Queen's eyes, he saw the same dreams reflected in her gaze. The bond between them was growing before either of them was ready. The Queen led him to a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace. The walls glowed with faint lines of energy, as if stars themselves had been etched into stone. In the center stood a circle marked with ancient symbols, a place where her ancestors had once joined their spirits in sacred rites. She explained that the first touch they shared had been only the beginning. The true ritual required opening their life force to one another, allowing energy to pass between them. It would be painful, perhaps dangerous, but it was the only way to test whether the prophecy could truly break the curse. The human's heart pounded. He was afraid, more than he wanted to admit. But he could see the Queen's trembling hands and pale skin. She had no choice, and if he walked away now, her people would not forgive him. More importantly, he could not forgive himself. He nodded, and the Queen, though surprised by his quiet courage, gave a faint smile. For the first time, she did not see him as a fragile outsider. She saw him as a partner stepping into the unknown at her side. They stepped into the circle. The air grew heavy, pressing down on them like invisible hands. The Queen reached for his hand, her touch cold yet steady. As their palms met, light spread from their skin, weaving around them in spirals. The human gasped as a surge of heat rushed through his body. He saw flashes of her life, crowds bowing in adoration, nights spent alone on a throne too vast for comfort, battles fought with fire and steel. He felt her loneliness, her pride, her endless struggle to be more than flesh, to be a symbol. At the same time, the Queen staggered as visions of earth filled her mind. She saw green forests, crowded streets, laughter shared between families. She felt the warmth of small joys, the weight of ordinary struggles, and the stubborn spirit of survival that had carried humans through countless hardships. It was not grand like the battles of her empire, but it was real. And for the first time in centuries, she felt what it meant to live not as a ruler but as a person. The light around them flared brighter. The human cried out as pain seared his chest, as if his heart was being torn open. The Queen gasped, falling to her knees, her strength draining faster than she expected. But even as the pain grew unbearable, she felt something changing inside her. The curse that had chained her body stirred, restless and afraid. For a moment it loosened its grip. She breathed without pain, her vision clearing in ways it had not in months. But the ritual was interrupted. From the shadows of the chamber, figures appeared, cloaked in black. Rival lords had sent assassins determined to end the prophecy once and for all. The guards outside had been bribed or killed, and now the intruders closed in with blades that shimmered with poison. The Queen tried to rise, but her strength had not fully returned. The human, though trembling from the ritual, stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between her and the attackers. He had no weapon, no training compared to these killers, yet his courage was sharper than any blade. He grabbed a fallen staff from the ground, swinging wildly to keep them back. The assassins laughed, thinking him weak, but his unpredictability forced them to hesitate. He moved not like a soldier trained in patterns, but like a survivor fighting for every breath. That chaos gave the queen time to gather her fading energy. With a cry, she raised her hand, unleashing a wave of force that hurled the assassins across the chamber. Guards finally stormed in, too late to prevent the attack, but in time to capture those who lived. The queen leaned heavily against the human, her body trembling. The ritual was incomplete, and though the curse had weakened, it was far from gone. Worse now, their bond was tied in a dangerous way. The failed ritual meant their lives were connected. If one of them died, the other would fall as well. When the court learned of this, whispers spread faster than fire. Some were horrified, others delighted. To their enemies, it was proof that the queen had doomed herself, binding her fate to a fragile creature who could never survive the struggles of the empire. To her allies, it was a sign that the prophecy was moving forward, whether they liked it or not. The queen, however, did not think of politics that night. She thought only of the human who sat beside her in silence, his body bruised and aching, yet his spirit unbroken. He had stood in front of blades meant for her, not because of duty, but because of something deeper, something he had not yet put into words. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this fragile being might truly be her salvation. And the human, though still afraid of what lay ahead, realized that he could no longer think of returning to his simple life on Earth. The bond between them was real, dangerous, and unbreakable. He was part of her fate now, and she was part of his. Whatever storms came, they would face them together. The palace had grown tense after the failed ritual. Guards doubled at every entrance, and the halls that once carried music now carried whispers. The queen sat upon her throne, but her mind was far from steady. Her people had seen her collapse, had seen her lean against the human for support. To some, it was weakness. To others, it was proof that the prophecy was alive. Either way, doubt was spreading like a slow poison. The human walked at her side each day, though he still felt like a stranger in the empire. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Some were filled with awe, others with open hatred. He had heard the word curse-bearer whispered behind his back. Yet when he looked at the queen, he found the strength to keep walking. He knew that if he faltered, she would fall with him. Their bond had tied them together, and now their survival was one and the same. At night, he often found her on the balcony overlooking the city. She would stand in silence, the stars above her, the lights of her people below. He could sense the weight she carried, an entire empire resting on her shoulders. One evening, he joined her, leaning against the stone rail. "You're afraid," he said softly, not as an accusation, but as a truth. The queen did not deny it. "I have led armies. I have stood against enemies that would crush worlds. But this bond with you terrifies me more than any war. If you fall, I fall. And if I fail, you will be dragged down with me. I did not choose this." "Neither did I," the human replied, his voice firm though his hands trembled. "But maybe that's why it matters. We didn't choose it, yet here we are. Maybe that's what makes it real." For the first time, the queen turned to him not as a ruler, but as someone seeking comfort. The words were simple, yet they carried a strength she had not expected. She realized then that he was not afraid of her power, nor of her curse. He was afraid of losing her, just as she was afraid of losing him. Their bond deepened with every passing day. The queen began to recover more of her strength, though the curse still lingered, clawing at her from within. The human, however, started to feel its shadow too. At times his chest ached as though a chain wrapped around his heart. He hid it from her, not wanting to burden her further, but she sensed it all the same. The court was restless. Some lords demanded the human be sent away, claiming that his weakness endangered the empire. Others argued that breaking the bond now would kill the queen outright. Debates turned into shouting matches, and the palace shook with tension. The queen silenced them with a single command, but she knew the pressure was building. Soon her enemies would make their move again, and they did. One night, as the queen and the human prepared to attempt another ritual, the palace trembled with an explosion. Smoke filled the halls and cries of panic echoed through the chambers. The queen's enemies had struck again, this time not with blades but with fire. The human grabbed her arm and pulled her to safety as walls cracked and ceilings collapsed. They ran together through hidden passages, guided by her memory of the palace's secret ways. The air burned with smoke and the heat made it hard to breathe. Yet even in that chaos, the human never let go of her hand. At one point, a beam of stone crashed down, blocking their path. The queen faltered, her body weakened by the curse. But the human pushed with all his strength. moving debris that should have been impossible for him. His determination gave her the will to keep moving. Finally, they reached a chamber far below the palace, untouched by the flames. The queen sank against the wall, coughing, her strength fading. The human knelt beside her, his face blackened with ash, his eyes filled with worry. "They won't stop," he said. "As long as they think I am weakness, they will come again. Maybe you should let me go." The queen's eyes widened in fury. "Do not speak such word. If you die, I die. If you leave, I fall. You are not weakness, you are the bond that keeps me alive." Her voice broke, raw and unguarded. "I have ruled alone for so long. I never asked to share my fate with anyone. But now I cannot imagine facing this curse without you." The human felt her trembling hand reach for his. He took it, squeezing firmly. "Then we face it together. No more running, no more fear. If we have to fight every enemy in this empire, we will." In that moment, the bond between them pulsed stronger, as if the curse itself had heard their vow. A faint light spread from their joined hands, softer than before but steadier. It was not the power of the ritual, but something deeper, the power of trust, the kind that could not be forced by prophecy. Above them, the palace still burned. Enemies still plotted, waiting for the perfect chance to strike again. But deep beneath the ruins, in that hidden chamber, the queen and the human made a silent promise. Their lives were tied together, their fates sealed. No force of fire or shadow would break them apart. For the first time since the prophecy began, the queen believed they might truly overcome the curse. And for the first time, the human understood what it meant to be more than a stranger in her world. He was no longer just a captive or a tool. He was part of her destiny, and destiny, once awakened, could not be stopped. The day of the final ritual arrived with a strange quietness. The palace, though still scarred from attacks, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the empire's citizens waited, watching from afar, whispering rumors of the human who had come from Earth to save their queen. Some doubted the prophecy, others hoped it was true. Inside, only the queen and the human knew the weight of what was to come. The human followed her to the chamber where the first ritual had been attempted. The floor shimmered with ancient symbols, their lines glowing faintly in the dim light. The queen stopped and turned to him, her face pale but her eyes fierce. She reached out, letting him grasp her hand. No words were needed. They had already faced fire, betrayal, and darkness together. Now only trust and courage could carry them forward. The moment their hands touched, energy surged around them. This time it was different. The light was steady, warm, and alive. The human felt a power he had never imagined, as if the empire itself flowed through his veins. The queen gasped, feeling the curse loosen, her body trembling as it began to heal. For the first time in months, she could breathe without pain. But the ritual demanded more. The bond required the full giving of their life force, the merging of strength, courage, and trust. The human looked into her eyes, seeing not just the queen but the person she had been hiding behind her crown. He could see her loneliness, her fears, and the endless burden of leadership. Yet he also saw her hope, fragile but unbroken. He took a deep breath and let himself open to her. Energy flowed from him to her, stronger than any force in the galaxy, and the light of the ritual spread throughout the chamber. Outside, the palace trembled. Rival lords and enemies had gathered, hoping to prevent the prophecy from completing. They waited, tense, weapons ready, but they could not see what was happening inside. Some felt a strange pull, an invisible force that made them stop, hesitate. Even they could sense that something greater than war was unfolding. The queen felt the human's courage and humanity filling her, strengthening her in ways she had never known. Pain still lingered, but it was fading, replaced by a warmth she had thought impossible. For centuries, her life had been ruled by duty and prophecy. Yet now she realized the true power had been the human beside her all along. He was not just a savior. He was a partner, equal in will and spirit. The ritual reached its peak. Light wrapped around them like the embrace of the universe itself. The human could feel the empire's energy, the pulse of countless lives merging with his own. The queen's heartbeat steadied. The curse shattered in invisible sparks, dissolving into the air. She fell to her knees, weak but alive, tears streaming down her face. The human held her up, his own body shaking yet stronger than ever before. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The queen and the human stood together, hands clasped, their bond complete. She looked at him with a mix of awe and gratitude, her eyes reflecting the endless stars beyond the palace walls. "You have saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Not just my life, but my empire and perhaps even yourself. He shook his head, smiling faintly. We saved each other, he replied. I could not have done it alone, and neither could you. News of their success spread quickly. The people of the empire watched as their queen, fully healed, walked among them with the human at her side. Doubts vanished, replaced by astonishment and admiration. For centuries, the empire had believed that only strength of arms and knowledge of the stars mattered. Now they saw that courage, trust, and the simple human heart could change destinies. The rival lords, defeated in spirit if not in body, had no choice but to accept the outcome. The prophecy had not been wrong, and the queen's throne was secure. She turned to the human, offering him a place not as a servant or subject, but as her equal. The people saw it, and slowly they began to understand the meaning of the bond. It was not only about healing, but about trust, unity, and the recognition that even the smallest and most ordinary beings could carry the weight of worlds. In the quiet of her private chambers, the queen and the human sat together, hands still joined. No words were needed. The trials, the pain, and the battles were behind them. Ahead lay a new path, one where two lives from different worlds could guide an empire toward hope and unity. The human, once an outsider, now carried the respect of a civilization. The queen, once weakened by a curse, now carried the light of a future where no one could tell her what she could or could not achieve. They gazed at the stars through the tall windows side by side. She finally allowed herself to smile, free from pain and fear. He smiled back, knowing that his life, once ordinary, had become extraordinary. Together they had rewritten fate, not through prophecy alone, but through courage, trust, and a bond that no enemy could break. And as the empire looked on, humanity proved once again that even in a universe of stars and aliens, the heart of a human could change everything.